Good morning, YouTube. I hope you had a wonderful week with your students. I'm back this week to share a little bit about how I help my students design their own investigations. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, my students absolutely need some scaffolding. So I want to show you some supports that I have in place to help my honors chemistry students plan an investigation for today's lab. But before I jump into it, I do have to make sure that I grade the pre-lab video. I always assign a pre-lab video whenever I am preparing for my students to design an investigation, and I find that the pre-lab video just really helps things to go a lot more smoothly. So I'm going to quickly grade those. I assigned it in Edpuzzle, and so I just want to kind of look at their answers to the questions. Sometimes I will give a pre-lab quiz, so it's like a 1 or 2 question quiz that just checks in with the students, like did they get what they needed to get from the Edpuzzle. So I'm going to do that right now, but then I will take you along with me to show you what I'm actually doing with lab and then how I'm setting it up for my students. I just finished looking at the pre-lab video. Generally speaking, the students did really well. I ultimately use those pre-lab videos just to give the students an idea of like the equipment, materials we're using. Definitely ask about safety. I feel like by asking the students to complete this outside of class, it makes it so much easier for the students to come in and be ready to go. That way, like my pre-lab discussion is just showing the students where everything is. However, today, obviously, it's a little bit different because they're designing their own experiment. So I do have some preliminary activities that I want them to do to be prepared for their experimentation. So what I think I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually pull out the equipment and materials that the students are using that is not in their lab stations, and then I'll show you the materials that I created to make it a little bit easier for them to think about how they want to design their investigation and ultimately uncover some of the reactivity of different metals. So I'm going to go set that up, and then I'll check in with you guys in a couple of minutes. I just finished setting up the lab for my honors chemistry students, and now I'm ready to finally talk a little bit about the lab that we're doing. So we're examining the reactivity of metals. We're looking at specifically magnesium, we're looking at calcium, and we're looking at aluminum. And the students ultimately have to construct some explanations for the reactivity down a group and across a period. So at this point in our unit on periodic trends, we've learned about the trend for atomic radius, we've learned about Coulombic attraction, we've spent some time constructing explanations for these things, but now we're moving into like, how can we relate what we've learned about attraction to what we're seeing with reactivity? And this is actually how I kicked off my unit on periodic trends. You know, I think very typically as chemistry teachers, we love to put lithium, sodium, and potassium in water and show the reactivity trend. But students really struggle with understanding what's happening. So by the students actually having more like hands-on with the materials and this lab today, I'm hoping that they'll have more of an opportunity to kind of understand like what's happening. It's really hard for students to design an investigation, and so my goal is to help them do that by providing some scaffolds, like for example, I talked about the pre-lab video. But besides the pre-lab video, before they get into the lab, before they actually start the lab, one of the things that they have to create is one of these. And I've talked about flowcharts and how to hold students accountable for lab work, specifically pre-lab work. So this is something that I created, and I absolutely love using this with my students because it helps them to think about like the steps that they have to perform. and then ultimately if they have to make some decisions based on the data that they've collected. So you can see there's lots of symbols here, and the students are going to be deciding what steps they want to perform in order to understand the reactivity trend down a group and across a period. And so they're going to be designing this before they actually get into the lab to complete the lab. So that's kind of like almost their ticket into the lab. Now you may say, like, how do they get the steps for the procedures? Well, in this lab, I have some pre-lab work that the students will be doing. They'll be using Bohr models, but then also they're making some predictions. On the back though, I do have some possible tests and procedures that the students can perform to decide, ultimately what's happening with the reactivity. So a lot of students, I'll find that they will do like all the tests no matter what, but I'm gonna strongly discourage them students from doing that today. Instead, I'm gonna encourage them to think more about like what information the test is providing to them, and then based on that they can decide if they need to perform another test to help them understand what's happening to the reactivity. We're going to try it today. This is the second time I've had students design their own experiment. The first time in my honor students, when I did a unit menu on mathematics and chemistry, I had them construct a procedure for being able to determine the thickness of a piece of aluminum foil. That was really tough for them. So I'm glad that some time has passed and we've gone through the unit together a little bit with periodic trends. We've done, so we've done mathematics and chemistry, then we moved into atomic structure and light. And so really we've done 2 full units since our mathematics and chemistry. So I'm hoping that there is some growth there and then this goes a little bit more smoothly, but you never know. Sometimes students can just be having an off day, but I think with all the scaffolding in place, I think this is going to be a really successful lab. At least I'm hopeful anyway. So I think for right now, I am going to set up for anything else that I need to do with my students for the day. So my AP students are doing some multiple choice mania today again. So I need to cut the cards for that. And then I will check back in with you in a little bit and show you how my students are doing on this lab. All right.
This is
Here we go. Oh my God. Whoa. Right away, huh? That does not mess around. Did you do, what other tests did you do? Whoa, it is. What other tests did you do? Did you? Yes, you do. Woo. That is crazy. So did you start with the hydrochloric acid test?
Yeah.
Okay, you did. Okay. So it did that right away. Nice. So do you have enough data then that you can say, wow, that was fast. Do you have enough data to say the trend?
Yeah.
Like you confirm the trend? Okay, all right. Well, I'm in between my AP and honors classes. This is my lunch period, and I am absolutely loving my schedule this year. I love that I have time to transition in between teaching the 2 courses. The lab went off so well today. I think that the flowchart really provided the necessary scaffolding that the students need to be more methodical about their approach. I think that the students were really engaged with the activity because they had a little bit more power over the things that they were doing. And then I really enjoyed the fact that not every team of students decided to do, for example, every single test. I know earlier I said that I was going to kind of, discourage them from doing every single test. A lot of students just want to do that, which is fine. But I want them to behave more like scientists and talk more about the scientific process and how, we need to make decisions based on the data that we accrue, what types of things we need to do in the lab. And I find that a lot of times as teachers, we focus so much more on the content instead of the process. And it is a challenge for me too. But I think by allowing your students to create their own procedure or pick and choose what types of things that they want to do to perform tests on a particular sample, I think that allows students to take a little bit more control over what they're doing in the lab and think more methodically about what their data is telling them and how to move through the lab to ultimately reach the learning goal. And so for us, looking at the trend for reactivity, I think the students really made fantastic strides in understanding that it wasn't necessary to collect all the different test data. The other thing that I like a lot about this lab is it encourages students to create a data table. And we talk about, data in terms of, being qualitative and quantitative. But this lab has all qualitative data, but I was really happy to see that so many students actually had a table and they created a space for their observations, because there really wasn't any quantitative data that they were collecting today. So I was really happy to see that that this lab kind of mirrored a little bit more of what science actually looks like, outside of the classroom in some ways. And then I was also really happy to see about this lab I could assess their understanding of reactivity and relating reactivity to Coulombic attraction. And I think that's going to make their explanations about the phenomenon that much stronger. There's only one more thing we have to talk about in our unit. Like I said, we're full-blown into periodic trends. We've talked about Coulombic attraction, effective nuclear charge, and the trend for atomic radius. The only last thing we have to talk about is ionization energy. So what I'm hoping that we'll do is in the next couple of days, we'll get through ionization energy, and then they will be in great shape for their unit assessment on trends. Well, I think that's it for me. I am going to get it set up for my AP classes, but I really hope that this video inspired you to think about ways that you can have your own students plan and conduct their own investigations, some scaffolding that you can provide to kind of ease them into the process. As always, I welcome your feedback. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys in a couple